Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. We're going to cover everything. We're going to cut through all the propaganda, give it to you straight from left, right, and center. The opinions are what counts. Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Saturday's edition. Boy, do we have a week to recap what happened in this great country of ours, and I'm real happy to bring my guest, Dr. Mark Sherwood, with me from the great state of Oklahoma. Mark, welcome back to Schaftlein Report. So happy to have you with me today.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Mark. Happy Saturday, and there's a lot to talk about. It's good to see you.
Hey, listen, we were in Venice, Florida yesterday for General Flynn's initial launch of his movie. He's going around the country, 35 cities, 50 days. I cannot tell you, the event was packed. There was 900 people here last night in Venice. The event went off spectacularly. For all our viewers and listeners out there, you have got to see the Flynn movie. This thing is emotional, it's filled with drama, and it tells the real story about what happened to a great American hero. So, a shameless plug for General Mike Flynn and everyone that contributed to that movie, Mark. I mean, it was a spectacular evening last night, and we're really proud of General Flynn.
Yeah, he's a great guy, a great friend of mine. I know he's coming to Tulsa, I believe, coming up on May 20th. So my date is checked. When you hear, I haven't seen the whole movie, but I saw the premiere, and actually I asked him about it when he was at an event here in Tulsa recently. And man, people need to know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey said. I think that clarifies a lot. That man has been through so much and holds his head high. I've never watched him talk about vindication. I've watched him talk about accountability, and Mark, and that, to me, that's the epitome of modeling great character.
Well, and not only that, but the integrity that goes with General Flynn and his love of this country. Folks, full disclosure, we are broadcasting on this show, through the studios with Brandon House because of the relationship General Flynn and Brandon have. And, Patriot TV has made spectacular progress in the 2.5 months that we've been at this, Mark, and we couldn't, again, without Brandon, without General Flynn, we couldn't be where we are right now. So special shout out to a couple guys on our team, and we've just built an outstanding group of people, from the people that produce the shows. We go out in the field, and this tour with General Flynn, he's going to be out there on a daily basis giving us live footage. So for all the Patriot TV fans out there, with us, because you're going to see some great behind the scenes things with General Flynn while he's on this tour. And as an American, I'm really proud for what's happening there, Mark. It's an honor to be associated with Patriot.tv. So hey, listen, enough of the accolades about Patriot. Let's get into some of these issues that we had to deal with in the past week. And I got to tell you something. When we talk about the campaign, all the Democrats want to talk about is January 6th and abortion. I mean, you would think the whole country cares about that. The reality is, and it's no surprise to me, Mark, the number one issue facing most Americans is that porous southern border. We used to, again, think back just 3.5 years under President Trump. You can't say it was 100% secure. That we're not going to go that far. But it was a relatively secure border. He was in the process of building a wall. There was enhanced security, remain in Mexico. Mark, in just 3.5 years, the damage that this president and his Department of Homeland Security have accomplished, it is astounding. I mean, we now have a 2,000-mile hole, and people care about it. Country seems to be losing its identity. Mark, you're a little bit closer to it than I am here, but what are you hearing in Oklahoma, and when you travel around Texas? I mean, what are Americans telling you? And I'm sure it's similar to what we're hearing here.
Yeah, they're tired of it, Mark. Look, it's obvious that life is about boundaries. We have boundaries around our homes. We have fences around our homes. We have doors in our homes. We have boundaries around states, and we should have boundaries around countries. This is elementary stuff. And I've said from the beginning, Mark, this is an impeachable offense, period. End of story. This is the biggest issue facing our country, because anytime we get infected by stuff, whether it be in the physical body, breaking our barriers up here, or our country, it's going to make us really sick. And where we are, right now. I'm just one state north of Texas in Oklahoma. And I can tell you unequivocally, there is a unique demonic relationship between the cartel and the CCP right here in this state. They purchased over 300,000 acres of land here under the guise of selling marijuana, and now they're smuggling fentanyl in here. It's such a sad indictment upon where we are right now. And you think about this from the Democratic movement whole agenda, it's real clear that if you build loyalty from these people coming in and give them a right to vote, well, you've got your voting block right there. That's a clear strategy, we know. And obviously now we're having to work to support this mess, and people are suffering from this all over the country. People are losing jobs because we're trying to deal with stuff. So this is a problem of epic proportions.
Well, just like the headline on our show today says, Mark, the Democrats are executing their plan almost flawlessly. You know, everybody on our side thinks this is such a horrible issue. Most of independent voters believe so. You know, some Democrats do. But when you look at the strategy of the far left wingers who are in that White House telling Joe Biden what to do, and he's listening, you know, hook, line, and sinker to him, they are executing their plan. And I hate saying it, folks, but it's almost flawless. I mean, Mark, if you were trying to build a socialist country, first thing you would do is open your borders and let every illegal immigrant into the country you possibly can. You know, we have laws in this country that once they're in, you have to, you have to house them. You know, you have to educate the kids. But now it's gone way further than that. Now they're getting prepaid debit cards, cell phones. I mean, I saw a thing the other day, Mark, that unemployed Americans, unemployment benefits, and some veterans benefits are less than what we're giving to illegal immigrants. I was shocked by that statistic. And yet, here we are.
Yeah, it's very sad to me, you know, and I appreciate what you said about a perfectly executed plan. I mean, we got to give credit where credit's due, right? In a weird, twisted way. And I really, you know, I've been asked this question a lot, you know, to understand where they are, Mark, it's important for us to be able to understand how they think. And if you don't understand how your enemy thinks, you're not going to be able to defeat them. I asked a long time ago from a spiritual point of view, I wanted to understand how the enemy thinks so I could walk in victory. We need to start thinking and understanding the way the enemy is trying to do. And to build communism, it starts off with building dependence on people, a big government. And you spread that gap more, you get these people that have nothing better to do than depend on the government to give them food, shelter, phones, cards, transportation, housing, etc. And they're executing this to the perfect deal under this humanitarian thing. You've got to care for them. It's not the American way to not care for people, you know. And obviously, from a clinician standpoint, which I am, if somebody goes into a medical emergency, you got to care for them. If they have a baby, you got to help them deliver. So they've kind of got the system like by its coattails. And I really think that the Republican or the conservative movement, patriot movement, whatever we want to call it, we've got to get together, circle our wagons, and be as unified and as organized with our agenda and our plan as the Democrats are with theirs. And we got to one up that thing with the mass of people and the massive patriotism, because patriotism is certainly infectious and contagious in my book anyway.
There's no question about it. And, you know, Mark, I had the privilege over the past week to get to go to two events at Mar-a-Lago where President Trump spoke. One was an event hosted by General Flynn. The other was a fundraiser for Kari Lake. We'll get into those a little bit later. The reason I bring that up is because President Trump mentioned the fact that the Mexican president is asking the U.S. to pony up $10 billion or he's going to keep the flood of illegals coming into this country. I literally was astounded. Here we have a head of state in Mexico, and he's about as far left as you can get. I mean, this guy is effectively a socialist. But the president, head of state of Mexico, demanding our government pay $10 billion just to start talks. Well, for our viewing and listening audience here, here's President Trump's response. And I'm quoting, I wouldn't give him $1. He said, if I'm president and they came to me with this, quote, demand of $10 billion, I would immediately slap tariffs on their automobile industry where no Mexican cars could come in this country. I mean, people respect strength. And that's what President Trump exudes. So, I mean, he was talking about, he doesn't call it illegals. He calls it an invasion, Mark. So when you have an invasion and you have a country trying to effectively say to you, they're going to blackmail you, you give me $10 billion just to start, well, we're not even going to talk. Look, I got a problem with that.
Oh, Mark, when I heard that, I was thinking to myself, if I was on that line taking that call, it would be a quick hang up, followed by a quick message, don't ever call me again. You're going to see how big that fence can get. Period. End of story. This is a silly process, the nerve of that quote unquote leader to even think they could get that. We need to secure our border. End of story. And you mentioned invasion. Invasion yields the term emergency. This is an emergency. So even these states, I've asked them, pony up, start securing your own borders because the federal government's not doing it. And there's enough good citizens out here with guns and a heart that could be deputized, like those deputies, those sheriffs along that border, and they would secure that border all right. There's probably some farmers out there that are pretty good with post hole diggers and probably can string up some wire and probably got some good pliers and they probably got some guns too. So I think that we've got enough people to do this if we just have the right leader in the White House that really understands this is a fundamental thing for our country to secure our borders.
Well, there's some offshoots to this border situation too, Mark. I mean, we haven't even talked about some of the negative stuff that's happening, but I'm going to mention it right now. The amount of drugs coming across that border has killed over 100,000 Americans in the past year. 100,000, I mean, that's a lot of sons and daughters, okay? The human trafficking that's taking place at that southern border. Again, how in your right conscience, if you're a political party, could you be embracing this strategy? I mean, there is a lot of suffering happening. And when I see that John Karine Pierre get up at the White House podium and try to blame Republicans for this, I mean, it's disgusting because everybody knows that's not the case. And when they say, well, Republicans had a bill, they could have passed it. That bill would have been worse than not doing a deal. Trump was right to suggest that people vote against it. So, I mean, Mark, you're in the medical field. What are you seeing in Oklahoma with this situation with these drugs and these overdoses? I mean, is it hitting home?
It is. And I think people need to understand that fentanyl is now being targeted to kids. There's these colorful, almost look like Skittles that are fentanyl that are sold to our kids. And 100,000 people, fentanyl is 100 times more addictive, Mark, than heroin. It is an opioid. It's addictive. And once you get on it, you have a hard time getting off. And you think about this. America right now is struggling with anxiety. Everybody's wanting to take the pressure off. So we got ourselves set up for a sort of an addiction and waiting. And the way these Mexican cartels work, and people need to know how this works because it's pretty creative and pretty crafty. Well, they will take a family that wants to come to America. Let's say the border is open. I want to go there and make $50 a day versus $5. Okay, fine. Again, the land of the opportunity. The cartel will say, okay, well, you give us $2,000 and give us one of your sons or daughters, and we will use them for a while and give you safe passage over here. But the problem is if they get a son, they're going to use them as a drug smuggler. If they get a daughter, they're going to use them in sex trafficking. And they never, ever get out. And they just keep blackmailing money from the family. Give me 2,000 more, 2,000 more. Sounds like the Mexican president, really, doesn't it? It sounds like he has a cartel mindset. You give me some money and I'll stop this. And so it's an enterprise system that's pretty ingenious. But it's not that ingenious when you understand how it works. And our job right now, I believe, would be to secure that border. Again, we were on a few weeks ago, common sense. Don't let anybody in. Figure out who's here. Kick out the people that don't need to be here. Make sure the people that are supposed to be here are documented appropriately and in the proper waiting lines, and then give it some time. Forget trying to do right all the time and trying to please everybody. This is about saving our country, and people are dying, Mark. 100 some odd thousand people. We've had them in our state before. Right now, you've got this big push where I'm at to make sure you got these pins around, these narco pins that could be sort of this antidote for fentanyl overdose.
Right.
Why are we spending money on that? Let's get rid of the fentanyl. I mean, it's common sense stuff, but again, we are such in a bad way right now, and I get just almost nauseated when I hear him talk with those press conferences from the White House.
Well, again, President Trump spoke extensively about this, and at both of those events, and I'm using his words here, under the Trump administration 47, we will have the largest deportation in the history of this country. And I'm telling you, it drew a round of applause both times. Mm-hmm. And yet the Democratic Party embraces this. I mean, folks, that's why I'm telling you, like the headline on our show today, they are executing their plan. The George Soroses of the world and these big money, radical far left donors who are supporting these policies, Mark. I mean, folks, we're thinking we're losing our country. They're thinking, oh, no, this is perfect. Because I want to allude to what you said earlier too, Mark. When all the illegal immigrants come into the country, they're scattering among all our states. A lot of Americans may not realize that, yes, they can't vote, but they are counted in our census.
Yes.
And when I want you to talk about that because in a minute. They are counted in our census. And a little tease, when we get to the bottom of the show, I'm going to talk a little bit of economics with you here about the effect that having 15 to 16 million illegal immigrants in the country, of which 8 to 10 million came in under President Joe Biden. So, Mark, allude to that a little bit, the effect of, the census, if you will, because a lot of people may not be aware of this.
Well, a census is used in part to determine allocation of resources and even allocation of political representation, i.e. the Congress and the Senate in a sense. And this has got us all distorted, right? They can't vote now, but there's going to be a push to make them vote. I'd say that's coming, right? And so this is just one step. And the reason they don't want them out of here is because it's a loyal following. This is their kingdom. And these are their parishioners.
Well, the interesting thing about it, and we're going to talk about polling a little bit towards the end of the show too, but one thing the Democratic base did not count on was that Hispanic men and African-American men, they're not happy about this. The Democratic Party seems to think they vote in a monolithic type way. Mark, shed some light on that. That's not happening right now, and they're actually ticking off some of their base they were trying to impress.
Yeah, I think over time they're going to start realizing that they're going to be, for lack of a better term, pooping in their own backyard when this happens. They really are, because some of these bases you talked about, the African American men, Hispanic men, there's a lot of them that still have a lot of honor, dignity. They have honor in the sense they're family people. They work hard. They support the needs. And they don't want to have a dependence upon the government. They want to make their own way, man. They're about the American dream, the American spirit. And I think that, to me, that's encouraging. And I think that right there, that singular voting demographic that you just mentioned, I believe that's going to be the single one that's going to turn the election in the favorable way this coming November.
Well, I sure hope you're right about that. And again, polling is early, folks, and we are going to talk about polling a little bit later. But right now, those two constituencies are causing somewhat of a panic among the radical leftist liberal Democratic base, because, again, they are executing their plan here. And there are side consequences when you execute a plan that the American public don't approve of. Mark, let's talk about pillar number 2 in the Democrats' plan to weaken this country, and that's running up massive deficits. Now, I know President Trump was accused of being a spendthrift, and he did spend a lot of money. So, I mean, our hands are not totally clean on this, but the latter part of it was when the government was basically throwing as much money as possible at the COVID issue. The problem is COVID goes away, And Joe Biden and the Democrats continue to spend as if we're still at COVID levels. I mean, Mark, we're running $2 trillion deficits, even with tax revenues coming in all-time highs. That's right, folks. The taxes all of us are paying, the federal government has never collected as much money as they're collecting right now. It's astounding how much comes in. And yet we're still running a $2 trillion deficit. Let me put it in perspective, folks. Joe Biden's budget, and Mark, you can talk a little bit about this. He actually proposed $7 trillion of spending. Folks, get your arm around that. Our government was taking in $4.5 trillion. They spent 6.5. So again, $2 trillion deficit. What does President Biden propose? Another $500 billion. I mean, Mark, people literally have a hard time getting their arms around this much money. But talk about it, because that $2 trillion annual is now $35 trillion, and it's among the biggest concern that Americans have, that we're spending beyond our means.
We better be concerned, Mark, because here's the situation. Anytime government gets too big and starts printing money like monopoly money that has no value anymore, it's a shell game. This is just nothing more than a make-believe game. You got a dollar that says it's a dollar because we believe it's a dollar, but how long is it going to be a dollar? We don't know. We can't even fathom the idea of trillions of dollars of money around. Can't fathom how to spend that much money. You think about that. I just appeal for every hardworking American out there listening right now. Think about this. If you had $7 trillion, could you even spend it? And the answer could be, what? I can't even think about what I'd want to buy. I'd want to give it away to help people. Well, what do you have with this? You got irresponsible spending that are bankrupting this country, that's creating a dependence upon more paper money to be supportive of this demographic group that they want to create this massive dependence on, which creates a loyal following because that's all they have. Where are they going to get their next dollar? Where are they going to get their next meal? It's got to be big government. Our Constitution was not laid out to create big government. It was laid out to protect us from big government. It was not laid out to make politicians become rich celebrities. It was made to protect us from political rich celebrities. We got to get back to common sense leadership here, Mark. And I think that, when you got the border crisis, you got stuff coming in that you don't want in, and you got stuff coming out that you don't want to leave. I don't know of a worse situation that you can get.
Well, I'm in your camp on that, and you're right. And the situation, think about this, folks. We've got an election coming up this fall, and everybody talks about the presidential election, but the United States Senate and the United States House are very important races too. You notice I'm wearing a Carrie Lake hat here, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show, but we are going to get into the politics of the situation, and we're going to explain to you why it's so critical that we not only put Donald Trump in the White House, but we gain control of the Senate too. Folks, we're going to take a break for 60 seconds. When we come back, we're going to talk Israel, weaponization, and what the Biden administration is doing to our military. Be back in 60.
We've learned through the pandemic we can never be caught unprepared again. And so many Americans, when COVID hit, they had nothing in the house. Stores were shut down, and doctors' offices were shut down. And even if doctors prescribed drugs, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, pharmacists wouldn't fill the prescriptions. That was a nightmare.
Now the situation is much worse. We have these horrible supply chain problems. In our emergency medical kit at the Wellness Company, we have 8 prescription drugs that are all potentially life-saving.
Most people who died with COVID, they died in the hospital because they didn't receive early treatment.
Every American family should have one of these.
I can tell you the Wellness Company kit is the answer.
Mark, let's shift the subject to an international situation right now. All the rage in the news lately about Israel has been they accidentally killed 7 aid workers. Again, the Biden administration, to me, I mean, it's not even a secret anymore. They have come out and basically said to Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government, enough is enough. No more mistakes in war, which can't happen. And there needs to be ceasefire, hostages released. I mean, Mark, I never thought I would see a day where a U.S. president, to our closest ally in the region, is basically trying to govern Israel as if it were the United States. And, here in this country, we have these left-wing radicals on campus supporting Hamas. These nut jobs show up at all these different rallies, showing the Hamas flag. And they're not just showing up, they show up everywhere. They interrupt President Biden's speeches. They go to the Capitol. I mean, this is not a uniparty issue. I mean, this is wherever these people can be seen and heard, they are. And I never in my wildest dreams believed we would have that. And yet there is an age divide in this country. It seems it's almost an inverse relationship. The younger you are, the more you support Palestinians and Hamas. The older you are, more people support Israel. But the Biden administration has firmly come down with the speech that was delivered late last Thursday and Friday this past couple days ago, and they made no bones about it. They've actually laid down conditions for Israel, and Israel's response is they are listening. And I hear all these media commentators, Mark, saying, well, we'll see how quickly Israel reacts to this. And, we'll see if they follow through on it. Mark, did you ever in your wildest dreams think we would have a U.S. president dictating Israeli politics when the majority of the Israeli population supports its government?
Yeah, I heard a little bit of that speech that Biden gave. And even today, I heard a lot about the U.S. policy will now be determined about how they respond to this ultimatum. Right. We don't look, okay, workers died. I agree for them too. I appreciate their sacrifice. Nobody likes accidents, and more people die. Some innocent people die. War is hell, no question about it. But let's not forget the people that died. They're going to a party in Israel. Let's not forget this, folks. They're going to a party in Israel. They're having music. They're having dancing, and lunatics parachute in. Lunatics come in. They come in with guns, and they rape and kill and pillage and barbarically destroy people. Why? They did it intentionally. It wasn't an accident. They did it intentionally because they were Israelis. Now, to me, if I'm a country's leader, I don't give a damn what anybody else says about that. Sorry about that, my little language there. But I'm going to go in there and I want to destroy every last one of them. Just like we had that mentality when Al-Qaeda sort of executed terror on America. We're going to go root them out and we're going to kill them. You don't come into our country and do that. And ultimately, we're so shifty about the Democrats and this stupid administration focusing on the external deaths, which I hate, but where they're shifting the focus away from the real purpose. And my message has been to the people that happen to live in Gaza, if you know where Hamas is, you know where they're hiding out, tell Israel, show them the way, and get out of the way, like yesterday. Because we need to understand that this conflict between Palestine and Israel is as old as time. You and I can talk about that all day long. And this whole idea about them getting along and singing Kumbaya around the fire is just not going to happen. Israel is defending their country. They're defending the lives that were lost. And I hope, for the sake of this whole situation, that they get them out of there as soon as possible. I appreciate Benjamin Netanyahu listening. I think listening is a good thing. Opening dialogue is always good, even if you don't agree with somebody. Right. And nobody wants to see humanitarian aid ceased or stopped to people that need it. But Mark, we can't forget the big picture here. We cannot.
Well, and look, it is let's call it what it is. It is a political PR nightmare that is happening on a global stage. I mean, there are people who are innocent victims over in Gaza that they don't have the proper drinking water. They don't have the proper amount of food. It's a horrible situation. It really is bad. And I think the one thing that I noticed the Israelis do on Friday, they are starting to open up some humanitarian routes to get some additional food and water, into Gaza. I think the situation they had before was untenable. I mean, you know, it's one thing to make a mistake, which they did with the killing of the 7 food workers, but listen, you can't have innocent people without food and water, even in a war zone. And I know the Israelis are very diligent trying to make things happen, but Mark, I do believe that, you know, they've got a PR nightmare on their hands right now, and I think both things can be accomplished. I think they can continue to their attacks on Hamas while at the same time demonstrating a humanitarian position for those innocent victims that literally they did nothing wrong. Problem is, I think, and again, these numbers may be slightly off, somewhere between 75 and 80% of the Palestinians actually support Hamas. So, yeah, you know, the Israelis, remember, they caught all kind of flack for going into that hospital. What they find? Hundreds of Hamas guerrillas in there. So I know that Israel cannot exist as a country while rockets are being fired at. I mean, nobody could. We'll talk about Ukraine a little bit, but my goodness. Now let's address the other issue at hand here. Look, the Israelis, they did a precision strike in Syria against Iranian higher ups in the Iranian government. This was when Trump took out Soleimani, that was one issue, but the Israelis took out a whole group of leaders, and the CIA, Mark, has warned Israel that, you know, attacks are imminent. What do you make of that move, and what was the bigger picture? I've got my thoughts, but I want to hear you go first on this one.
Well, I certainly think, to echo your sentiments, Mark, this is indeed a nightmare that's not going to go away. This is a real life nightmare, and there's no win situation. I don't think, you know, Benjamin Netanyahu or anybody in their right mind would want to see innocent people suffer. I mean, that's not the point. But I think we all agree that even when we were attacking Al Qaeda way back when, probably innocent people died. You can go back and find that. War is not a perfect thing, and unfortunately, Israel's fighting for the security of their country. You know, hopefully, we're not doing that in this country soon because of our border security ineptitude. But I think they're trying, and like you said, it's sad when you get right on the core issue of this animosity between these two people groups. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be there till the end of time. And this is part of, I guess you would say, biblical prophecy / history at the same time. And we need to really catch that. As far as, you know, next steps where we go from here, I don't know what the answer is going to be. I really don't, Mark. I'm grieved and saddened by the whole thing. I think that this hotbed that is Israel's been the focus of this kind of stuff for centuries, for eons, for millennia. And here it is again. And the threats, I believe they're real. I really do. I believe that this whole issue right now could very well yield this concept of a World War III situation, because it's just like this pinpoint hotbed that's not going to get any better. And I have a deep concern about that. So I think those threats are indeed real. I think Israel probably is well aware of those, and probably has been well aware of those, and should be going forward.
What amazed me, Mark, was the precision. I mean, I know the Israeli intelligence is second to none. I know they've got incredible weapons, some of which were supplied by the United States. Contrary to what a lot of people think, that the Biden administration stopped arms shipments, that's just not true. I mean, look, we criticize the Biden administration a lot, and rightfully so. But the fact is, they have continued selling arms to Israel against the protest of a lot of their base. So, you know, in one way, we'll give them a little bit of credit here, because they did stick with the original plan. But, you know, the tone and basically what they did, Mark, they drew the red line and told Israel, don't cross this red line. I'm not going to be repetitive here, but you don't do that. You do not get involved in the domestic politics of another country. And Mark, you and I know why the Biden administration is doing this. It's called Michigan. And right now, and we'll talk about it polls later, but Trump is ahead in Michigan by quite a lot. So I got to believe there's some political twisting going on here. But let's go back to what we were talking about here related to Syria.
Mhm.
I mean, what's the end game for Israel? They knew that the Iranians, after they took out that leadership group, and how they all knew they were going to be there at that particular time is astounding. You know, that's the Israeli intelligence operation. There had to be some infiltration somewhere, somehow. I mean, that mission went off without a hitch. Obviously, it was approved by Netanyahu and the top generals in Israel. Israel wouldn't have done that without approval at the top. Now, the country is bracing for an expected retaliation. And you mentioned World War III. I mean, look, I've read books dating back, to the 30s, 40s, 50s. I mean, throughout history, recent history, there's always sparks that happen. And Mark, is this the spark? I mean, I've heard people come up to me and say, Mark, I think the reason they took them out was they expected retaliation and they want to take out the Iranian nuclear capability. I mean, it's an interesting theory. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but it's certainly out there right now.
I look at both sides of this, Mark, and again, I think this is a spark that very likely could go there. And I even tremble a little bit at saying those words because I don't want to put fear in people, but we need to be prepared for that, folks, and really understand that this is a real possibility. As far as Israel goes, I mean, I think that they probably firmly believe that if you take out the threats over here, and they've always stood alone in a lot of different situations, other than America being a strong ally. They've always, this little tiny country full of rocks, I've been there. It's just like, it's not even that beautiful, I mean, I'm not trying to be funny about that, but it's a country that's a tiny country that doesn't have the best climate in the world. And yet, why is it the center of attention? It always has been, and it always will be. So for me, when I look at this thing, I mean, I kind of look at it with a sense of wonder and a little bit of trepidation and anxiety. But for me, I look at it in the sense that, God said this would be the thing. God said it'd be the center of attention. And I'm thinking maybe that's confirming a few things we all need to hear. And I can't imagine a country called the United States of America not supporting Israel. And it's heartbreaking to see us sort of shifting that way. And you mentioned the red line. Who determines the red line? Since when do we determine the red line for somebody else? That tends to be a controlling spirit. That tends to be a controlling thing that they're trying to do here. And I've noticed this too. When the Democrats get backed into a corner or something, they become more aggressive at their agenda and their narrative. And that's all that's out there because they seem to control the media too, other than Patriot TV, of course, right? And so, they keep that thing going out there to keep in the minds of people. So that's why I'm really excited about what you're doing, and even Patriot TV, a plug for that too, because it's giving people the other side, probably even the third side of a two-sided coin. And people need that right now. We need true information to understand what's going on, not just in this country, but around the world. And we need to keep our head up, our heart up, and be aware of what's going on, exactly what you're doing.
Well, we've got some great things that we're going to be announcing come very soon related to Patriot.tv. And we've got some really exciting additional show hosts that are going to be joining us. We'll talk about that later. Let me stick on international affairs here, Mark. Secretary Blinken, let's shift to Ukraine a little bit here. It does appear that aid package, which was held up in Congress when they were on recess, it does look like that aid package may come to a vote, and come to a vote pretty soon. You get conflicting reports out of Ukraine. Some Ukrainian generals are saying we can't beat the Russians. Others are saying we can. You see the Ukrainians carrying out attacks deep inside Russia, causing havoc on the Russian people, making them feel what the Ukrainian people are feeling. And yet, Secretary Blinken was making reference, Mark, to Ukraine joining NATO.
Yeah.
Shed a little bit of light on that for our viewers, because that, to me, that was somewhat ominous and concerning.
That is more than a spark. That is a burning log, to put that in perspective. if Ukraine is allowed into NATO at the conditions it's in right now, the status it's in right now, that means that all these other countries around the world that are part of NATO have an agreed upon obligation to go there, fight, defend together. That's what NATO's about. And that's going to mean most likely, I believe, U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine fighting against Russia. And I think about what that means for our country. What does that mean for the world? You couple that with Israel and you throw this thing on top of it, you've got this worldwide conflict that's on two different ends of the spectrum that will meet. It will meet, it will join, the spark will become part of the burning log, and you're going to have an inferno, and it's going to be a World War III or better.
Well, I hope that doesn't come to play, and I know you do too, because the damage, listen, the weapons today, I don't think most people grasp the destructive nature. They see the Russians and the Ukrainians fighting along trench warfare, and they see the drones hitting various parts of each other's country. They see the attacks, and in most of the world, it's not affecting most people. But I got news for you. If the situation breaks out between Iran, Syria, Israel, and then you have, it does look like additional weaponry will make its way to Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
Look, European Union has been supplying the Ukrainians with a lot of weapons. So I don't want to give people the false impression that it's the United States or bust, because the European Union has effectively been matching what the United States has been providing. But I'm telling you, I that was a head scratcher for me. I'm saying, this is one of the issues of why this is happening over there. And I'm sitting here saying, did he really mean that? I mean, or was it just, what was he doing with comments like that, Mark?
I don't know if it was bluster, posturing, political gamesmanship, or reality. And my hope is that it's not reality right now, because that is that Pandora's box that I described a moment ago that none of us really wanted to see. And you mentioned warfare and the weaponry. I mean, we haven't talked about the idea of biological weaponry, satellite usage weaponry, weaponry that comes through the water, weaponry that comes through the space, the sky. This is where we would go with this. There's so many things going on out there that we probably don't even see and probably kind of comprehend. It's almost like Star Trek in the future, with the weapons we have, laser technology. And, we're talking about if that sort of trench warfare broke out to anything more than that with the Iran, Syria, Ukraine, Russia situation, we probably can't even imagine the epic proportions of fear and calamity and chaos that would spread across this world. I'm sure that higher ups right now are probably thinking about that, except for our White House. I hope that President Trump is thinking about that right now, intently with good advisors. Hopefully, General Flynn is one of those good advisors because he thinks like that. And we need to be prepared for things like that and do everything we can to sort of keep those fires. We talked about the sparks, the logs, keep them beat down.
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned the military. My big concern, everything that you just talked about is a big concern, but if the United States military was forced to engage right now, our military's been subjected to diversity, equity, inclusion, racial quotas, sexual orientation quotas, gender identity. I mean, there are so many things that sort of demonize different segments of the military. And I've got a big concern that, and I hate using the word wokeness, that's like an all-encompassing word, but some of the policies and procedures for achieving what they call racial equality, gender neutrality, transgender. I mean, the military has a purpose to defend, kill, and break things. I mean, that's what a military does in very rude, crude terms. Sure, there's a lot of things that go with that. We know that. I mean, we work with General Flynn. But, the military is engaged to protect a country and to break things. That's what the military role is. And yet, I mean, if we were in a horrific situation where someone in Russia, Vladimir Putin, or some of his generals misread the intention of the United States and the European allies, you've got a big problem there. President of Poland has already told the European leaders, get ready for war. Now the Russians launched a missile over Polish airspace. I mean, we're not trying to sound like we're fear-mongering here, folks. We don't want to be that way at all. But these are just facts it's happening. All you have to do, I mean, I'm not going to criticize mainstream media on this or terrestrial media or any outlet that perform. These are just sort of facts. We didn't make these things up. I mean, these were statements said. You've got the CIA advising the Israelis attacks imminent. You got the Secretary of State making reference to Ukraine and NATO. You've got, aid packages that do appear that they are going to be voted on in the House and the Senate. Mark, this is real stuff. I mean, it's not getting any easier.
No, when I think about our military, and the direction they've taken, Mark, away from mission, away from protection, away from honor, away from courage, away from sacrifice, and made it one of, I don't even want to call it DEI. I want to call it just overall confusion. You've confused your mission. You've confused your purpose. And General Flynn would tell you, and I would tell you, if you're in a war, I don't care who's in the foxhole next to me. I don't care what they believe. Don't really care anything else as long as they're able to shoot that gun and defend me, and I'm going to defend them. We're on the same page. And that's the beauty of America. Nobody's criticizing somebody for, believing something different. But we've lost our sense of cohesive mission. And we focused more on this idea of inclusion and equity. Equity is not equality, man. It's not. And so we've got so much invested in that and so much pushed away, divested away from this idea of purpose and our passion to defend this country. And I'm concerned about our military being able to win an all-out war. We can't find applicants. We can't find people that can physically fit in a uniform. And I'm not overstating that at all. It's not okay right now. You look at Russia's military recruitment video, it looks like something I'd want to join. It gets me fired up. Not that I'm being facetious about that. But then you look at ours, it looks like a cartoon. Looks like something
one thing about
distance, and I'm getting it.
I know exactly where you're getting at there. And one thing about it, Putin he issues an order and they have to follow it. I mean, they do not tolerate, they're expanding their military, not shrinking it. So, but, that's another subject. Listen, we're going to take another break, folks. We'll be back shortly. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the weaponization of the Justice Department, other things the Biden administration is doing to its political enemies. We're going to talk, Mark mentioned the media. We're going to get into that. Be back shortly.
Consumers often ask, what should I expect when I take the Bella Grace elixir? And the answer's varied. It really depends on what your health and wellness needs are. I would consider this as your foundational core product for a whole range of health and wellness issues. Let me give you a few examples. If you're a little bit older and you have some joint health issues, some problems with mobility and discomfort, the elixir is going to be your best friend. If you have some skin health issues, wrinkles, hydration, aging, all of those elements are going to be benefited from the elixir, including age spots. Now, if you're in a younger demographic, maybe visual health is where you need some assistance. Eye fatigue, dry eyes, all of those are going to be benefited by the elixir. It's a core product because it benefits so many.
And we're back. Mark, again, I had the privilege of being down in Mar-a-Lago for two events. President Trump spoke at both of them. And it was so ironic because here's a man who literally is going through lawfare. I mean, he's got the full weight of not only the federal government, but New York State, state of Georgia. I mean, this man is fighting what I call a multi-front war. And he's winning some battles, he's losing some battles, he's in the game. I'm telling you something, by his demeanor, you would never even know that there was any cases going on. I mean, he spoke openly about it, how people in Georgia are trying to pull stunts with the legal system. Look, those people in New York thinking Mar-a-Lago is worth $16 million, they need to have their head examined. That property's well north of $250 million. I mean, specks of dirt in Palm Beach on the beach. He's literally right on the beach, all the way to the intercoastal on that property. It's a spectacular place. And for them to say it's worth $16 million, I mean, it's laughable. It really is. And so he's not only fighting those battles. Again, these documents cases, Biden gets off with a slap on the wrist and saying he's incompetent. Trump, they want to carry the case to court. The prosecutors in Georgia, the full story there. We've talked about it. The complete injustice in New York, things that are happening right now. So, and it's not just President Trump, it's others too. But when you have a Justice Department that gets weaponized against your political opponents on things like, trumped up charges, no pun intended, Mark, this is, again, we think in horror that this is happening. Go back to our headline. This is part of the Democratic Party executing its plan because they see the polls and they're fearful of President Trump.
That's exactly the agenda. And this kind of goes back to the idea of Nazi Germany, doesn't it? Let's go ahead and bring terror upon our opponents. This reeks of communism that we're slowly treading down those pathways, it seems, right now with the Democratic agenda. And, of course, my history in law enforcement, I can tell you this whole idea of political selective prosecution to sort of bring down a big name brings accolades, funding, and money to these elected and even appointed official positions. And so, the selfish nature of this, the personal vendettas of this is out of hand. You're right. You look at we're supposed to look at cases on an individual basis, and you compare them to what is known. You compare them to what is case law. It seems to be in this, and I'm putting on my law enforcement hat a minute here. It seems like there's case law being created right now, being developed. And that's tragic to me because it shouldn't be like that. The Justice Department has a job to do. I get it. But it should not be about going after one person's or one party's agenda. It should be about protection of the Constitution and the same standard that Donald Trump's under, the same standard that I'm under, you're under, General Mike Flynn and Joe Biden ought to be the same. It ought to be the same burden of proof, the same level of case law. But right now we've transgressed to this idea of political favoritism when it comes to the weaponization. And that grieves me from the heart, from my whole history of law enforcement.
Yeah, and Mark, what bugs me? I mean, we have crime in this country that is just out of control. And yet here we are devoting, we meaning as a country, whether it's the state of Georgia, the state of New York, the federal government, resources. And again, these lawyers are not cheap. I mean, the investigators, the lawyers, the court. We already know what Trump's legal bills are. They're astronomical. So, you weaponize the department against him, then he has to take dollars that he may have spent on campaigns or advertising or staff or promotion. He's having to pay legal bills with it. Again, folks, we're aghast at this, and yet this is part of the plan, and it's working. We look at crime out of control. We see, pick a city. I was looking at an article earlier today. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Would you think Albuquerque, New Mexico is a high crime area? Apparently it is. Okay. New York City, you see just disaster after disaster up there. Young 31-year-old police officer shot by a guy that had 19 felonies on his record. Here we're going after a former president, and yet there's literally crime exploding all across the country. People are fearful of it. And yet it's this pervasive feel on the left that, well, yes, there's crime, but you know what? There's been white suppression, for decades, and people are just sort of letting it out. And no, that's not the right answer. We live in a multiracial country. We have different religions. We have, it is a melting pot country. Okay, it really is. And to sit here and have these resources utilized against your political opponents or your political enemies, if you will, in Trump's case, it smacks a lot of Americans, Mark, that this is just not right. They may not know how to value Mar-a-Lago. I get that. Okay. And it's egregious what's happened. But there's the American public generally at its core has a sense of right versus wrong. And I think that it's no coincidence that when President Trump started getting hit with all this litigation, his poll numbers actually went up, because I'm shocked to say this, but I think these Democratic liberal prosecutors have made Trump somewhat of a sympathetic figure.
They have, and it's going to backfire, because when you persecute someone who is the recognized leader like that, it sort of brings galvanization to that party. And you're starting to see a little bit of galvanization, even with people that didn't really support President Trump. Well, now they are. And I think, to sort of tie a nice connector bow to all this, Mark, is it very important people understand where's the money coming from that's using to being funded the DOJ to do what they do. That's coming from the taxpayers. That's coming from this monopoly money, this continued debt, $35 trillion and climbing rapidly that we're doing. We continue to pay the money to bigger government to spend more money to attack its people, not protecting us at the borders or even in our personal spaces, seeing crime out of control. Look at DC. What an embarrassment.
Oh,
right
terrible.
there in the hub of what's supposed to be the most secure place, you got the worst crime rate. That ought to tell everybody the story they want. And I've said it like be oversimplified probably. If the government tells you to do something, don't. They don't know what they're doing with money, food, medicine, representation, protection. Do the opposite, and you're probably going to be better off.
Well, Dr. Mark, I think part of that lies in the fact that the at least the mainstream media, not outlets such as Patriot TV, certainly, and some of our brethren in conservative media, but the mainstream media is like the old, was it Praetorian Guard protecting the Biden administration. I mean, we've illustrated on this show today how the Democrats are executing their playbook, and yet the media, hey, attaboy, Joe, keep going, Joe, yeah. And, Trump's mean, bad. And, we see President Biden in decline. We see stories like Sage Steele, the former ESPN reporter, who said, hey, when I interviewed him, my executives told me you will stick with this script and you will not deviate from it. And, when John Pierre holds her press conferences, they really shield this man from the American public for the most part. And look, we cannot like it, but he is our president right now. We want our president to do good, but boy, Mark, the media does everything they can to protect President Biden, and they do everything they can to shoot arrows at former President Trump.
Well, President Biden is a declined figure right now, and we've talked about this before. I hate that for the human being part of that, the humanity of that. It's bad. He has no business being in that position right now. Clearly, can't carry a conversation on it. It's very sad. And with that said, the media is bought and paid for. It seems like they get the same funding that funds the government, that funds many of our politicians, and pads their pockets. So we're really in a bad way right now, and that's why again, we're on Patriot TV. Even if we weren't, this network, this gives us the ability to actually get a story out. And I encourage people to actually share the information you get. The best way to make freedom ring across our country is to utilize our mouth to carry it. It goes from one person to the other. And that's how great messages are carried. And I don't have a lost cause with our country. I think we can get it back. I think we can reinstitute patriotism once again. It might not be what it once was, but who says it can't be better?
Well, I think that was very well said, Mark. We're going to take our final break, but when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the economy, and we're going to give you the latest polling update about where this race really stands. Back in 60.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency. which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most private assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Elliott, PhD at 877-547-5743. That's 877-KIRK-PhD.
Hey, Mark, the numbers came out yesterday, 3.8% unemployment, 300,000 jobs. Everybody was clapping. And then the economists said, well, wait a minute. The reason we have this is because we've had 8 million additional people come in the country, and we're spending $2 trillion more than we take in. Mark, we got about a minute left here. What are your thoughts? Economic numbers, and then the polling is showing Trump still leading, but the race is tightening.
Well, economic numbers, you have X number of people coming in, you create jobs for them, you pay them a small wage, you count that as a tally tick mark. I gave them a job, but your debt is climbing over here to take care of them. That doesn't make sense to me. That's just simple 101 math. People need to think through that. With the polling numbers that come in, polls are inaccurate. They sometimes are misleading. Our job is to at least be aware of them, but become a voter, become active, become part of the solution by getting involved in whatever way you can. Make sure to vote, let your voice be heard, take somebody else to the polling place with you at the proper time, and that'll make sure that your voice is heard. And I believe at the end of the day that the American voices are going to get heard. I really do. And I believe the American voices are going to ring loud, and I believe we got a real chance here to regain some ground that we've lost over the last 4 years.
Dr. Mark Sherwood from Tulsa, Oklahoma, thank you for joining me on this weekend Schaftlein Report. And for all our viewers and listeners, please continue supporting Patriot.tv. This is Mark Schaftlein broadcasting from Venice, Florida. Thank you for having us into your room today. We'll see you next weekend.